AM560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. Our next guest recently wrote a piece entitled, What Really Happens During ICE Operations? But we already know that. We know what happens during ICE operations. Armed, masked men disappear people, mainly focused on 5-year-olds. To the extent we ever hear about them again, they're held in violation of the Constitution at facilities ripped from Midnight Express when they're not executed on the streets straight away. Right? That's a nice operation. At least that's what I understand it to be from all of the leading lights of the left that are opining on it, which is why we have to abolish ICE and we have to abolish CBP and we have to open our borders and we have to be sanctuary states and sanctuary cities. And then when we remove Bad Orange Man, we need to pursue the demogification of the entire country and task well-respected Nazi hunters like Larry Krasner and Charlemagne the God to prosecute the war crimes against the war criminals and capital punishment for these traitors. Right? I mean, because, we're getting to that point. James Schwesnettel is the co-owner of Moon Palace Books. He's an important voice in Minnesota. He was important enough that Jake Tapper put him on.
I understand that, but they take people to Fort Snelling here, which literally was built as a concentration camp, and Alligator Alcatraz, which I think we can all agree is a concentration camp. Not saying they're Dachau, I'm not saying they're putting people in ovens yet, but these are concentration camps.
Okay.
I don't need to argue with you about that.
No need to argue. They're concentration camps. I said so. Fort Snelling is a concentration camp. Alligator Alcatraz is a concentration camp. Broadview, Illinois, that's a concentration camp. They haven't put the ovens in yet. Not yet. These are the people that are on the side of what is right and proper and true. Really. For more on this, please be joined by the author of said piece. Not that stuff, the stuff about what really happens in ICE operations. Tom Weitzel, former chief of police for the village of Riverside. Tom, thanks for being with us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, good morning, Dan, and thank you for having me.
So you've been to Broadview, the ICE facility there, when you were police chief. So there are no ovens there yet, right? Not yet.
No, yes, I have. I have been to that facility when I was chief several times for just observation and then actually a meeting once. And when I was there, it was absolutely a processing center. That's what it was built for, and that's what it was. And, back then, there was nobody even knew where it was. It was like you could find a parking space anywhere. It had no controversy surrounding it, yet they were still processing illegals at that facility, and at the end of the day, they were still, transferring them out of state to be held longer than 24 hours.
Well, your secret concentration camp has been discovered now.
That is a facility for processing. They fingerprint, they take mugshots, they verify identifications. Yes, they're held there until they can, and now they're transporting them either to Indiana, Wisconsin, sometimes even farther out of state than that. And you would see those when the confrontation would, at the end of the day, around 5 or 6 o'clock, when the transport vehicles would try to leave the property. You would see the protesters and rioters there kind of rush the officers that were there and the vehicles when they exit. They're leaving the state. That's where they're going that day.
And your interaction when you were police chief with federal law enforcement officers, whether it's ICE or CBP, doing enforcement and removal operations, what was that like?
They were targeted for sure. I mean, we did an operation with the federal government where we were looking for warrants. There's 100 warrants here in Illinois, and we would meet, and the federal government was involved, ATF, FBI. They even had some Secret Service agents in. They had Homeland Security for intelligence. They had analysts, and they would give us packets, and you would go out and look for these individuals. And that's what's happening with the ICE. They give you the targeted people they're looking for. They're either convicted felons or, in some cases, final orders, meaning the final order, meaning they've been through all the appeals process, and you would look for that. And at times, other people got caught up in the arrest because you were looking for subject A, and you found him, but he was with subject B and C who were also in the country illegally. They weren't targeting them. They were targeting the operation that they had for the morning.
So it's your experience that they were not disappearing people or otherwise engaged in unlawful actions, violating people's due process rights. We hear a lot from people who don't understand the legitimacy of administrative warrants and what the lines are and so on and so forth. But your experience was what? Transparency, following the law, collaboration with local law enforcement back in the heady days when they were allowed to?
Yeah, it was certain transparency, without a doubt. And we did cooperate on these operations that were either looking for drug trafficking, human trafficking, like I said, outstanding warrants that were serious warrants. And they were always our partners. They always provided manpower, equipment, data. So it was all transparency. We never hid anything from anybody. They just didn't, the media was never covering it back then because nobody cared, honestly.
Mm-hmm. And did you find that the federal law enforcement officers were soldiers of fortune that were just grabbed from local watering holes the way they're being described today? Or are these officers who've gone through a good bit of training, who have a good bit of background in law enforcement and were actually quite professional in the execution of their duties?
I found them to be very professional. They did have extensive training. They were also almost a great deal of these officers were former military. So they had either military training before getting out of their deployment or out of their commitment to the military. They would go to be, sometimes there were MPs in the military, sometimes there were just military officers in the Coast Guard, Army, Air Force. They would transfer into civilian policing or federal policing, and they already came with a lot of military bearing and military training, which works out very well in law enforcement. And then they'd have the training from the federal government, and if you went into local policing, you'd have the local police academies and field training programs. But, I mean, there were 60, maybe 65% of these individuals, these officers, were coming during that time from the military itself.
Well, that's interesting because I know roundly we hear people pay great homage to our military men and women, and they represent the best of us. But then for those that go into federal law enforcement like ICE or CBP, all of a sudden they immediately transform into Nazis. That's so strange that it happens that way.
That is exactly what's happening now. Those military officers or even the frontline people transferring, many of them apply for police agencies, even local police agencies when they come out, because they're desirable, they're trained, they are physically fit, they're trained in firearms already. All you're doing is retraining them on how to operate, for example, in Illinois or in your department.
Whoa, Chief. Not if Laura Fine has her way. Legislation from the good senator from Glenview to prohibit ICE and I assume CBP officers from becoming state or local law enforcement in Illinois. You can expect that to be rushed through the General Assembly into Pritzker's desk.
That is, my opinion of that is that, first of all, that's unconstitutional. You would be targeting a whole class of people, a whole class of officers. I mean, because they would be saying this class, if you work there for this period of time. And notice that legislation is written only during the Trump administration, at least thus far. Did you see that? That's what it is thus far.
Yeah,
and
right.
That's targeting a group of professionals.
Oh, well, the U.S. Constitution is something that the regime in Illinois is happy to work around, tear apart, as the political needs, dictate. So don't worry about that, because they're certainly not.
You could disagree with maybe the methods or the training, or you could disagree. And I always think there's avenues for that. The avenues is go to Congress and get the law changed, or go to court. But these types of initiatives where you're just going to wipe everybody with a big brush and just say, well, we're going to eliminate this whole class from being police officers in Illinois is unconstitutional.
We were just talking about this situation out in West Chicago where a teacher posted the words "Go ICE," and it has the community in an uproar, and no one feels safe anymore. We had a similar. It's interesting just talking about the free speech rights of people. We had former Cook County Judge Jimmy Brown, on the show yesterday, and I saw you posted about this as well. So Jimmy Brown was a retired. If people didn't catch the interview yesterday, they should look it up. Former Cook County judge, 30 years in the criminal justice system in Cook County, retired 5 years ago, wrote an op-ed against the left's lawfare for John Cass at his outlet, johncassnews.com. A month later, there is a solicitation put out by the Illinois State Supreme Court to fill 12 judicial vacancies in the short term. The term was a year. Jimmy Brown put a letter with a resume in as so deemed. The Illinois State Supreme Court selected him as one of the 12. And then a couple of these Praetorian Guard lawyers associations found that op-ed he had written, and they said he should be removed. And then the Illinois State Supreme Court removed him on which day? Wednesday? On Monday of this week. So the speech rights of Cook County Judge Jimmy Brown, the free speech rights. I mean, here's what you have in West Chicago, in Cook County, in Illinois. You have intellectual martial law. And the identitarian orthodoxy will be enforced. It will be enforced against a gym teacher at an elementary school in West Chicago. It'll be enforced on someone who these same groups praised as a great jurist, but he wrote the wrong op-ed, even in retirement, and when they had a chance to pounce on him, they did, and the state Supreme Court went along. This is intellectual martial law, what you have in this state.
Yeah, I commented on that on my X account because he was highly rated. He was certified by all these lawyer organizations. And in retirement, like you said, he appears on the John Cass podcast, makes his opinion known. They allow him to come back, right? And now those two lawyer associations file a complaint. And you can bet, Dan, that somebody that's in that association notified the leadership and said, hey, you know what, this isn't wrong. They don't like him. They said, we think you should file a complaint. Our organization should send a letter to file a complaint that he should not be allowed on the bench. And that's how it happened. And that's politics, right? That's what's so they're playing the politic game with the Illinois Supreme Court too. I mean, that's just canceling somebody for something that he expressed an opinion on. That's highly rated. That nobody disagreed that he did an excellent job while on the bench. I didn't see one negative comment about that.
Well, I mean, things like your individual rights, even-handedness, even enforcement of the law. These are all matters of politics in this state. I mean, you don't. It's what Mark Lennon said on the show yesterday. We have a rule of men in this state, not the rule of law, and that ends badly for all these history buffs out there making absurd comparisons, you may want to peruse the history of the law being decided by the whims of those in power.
This rhetoric is so bad. Active police officers I still know told me they went to look for an offender, a child sex offender in the suburbs the other day at a warehouse, and they wouldn't let him in. And the officers and detectives said, "We're looking for one of your employees. We have nothing to do with ICE, okay? We're from the village of so-and-so. We're looking for a child sex offender. We have a warrant." And they wouldn't let him in. And they're like, "We're not, we're not, you're not going to help us?" Look, and they're like, "No, get out of here." And so everybody thinks anytime the local police, Chicago police, are going to look for anybody, they automatically think it's an ICE operation, no matter what it is.
Better 1,000 child sex offenders go free, Tom, than anybody cooperate with ICE. That's the new motto here of the justice system. Tom Weitzel is the former police chief for the village of Riverside. Tom, thank you as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great morning.
You too. And Tom joined us on Chicago's Morning Answer.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer.